introduction. And thank you everybody for being here. Over 500 people. Nice turnout. Okay. Really glad to have you all with us. And what an honor and a pleasure. And Roger, welcome. It's nice to be in conversation tonight together.
Thank you.
Um,
It's a pleasure.
yeah. And those of anybody who's been following on social media, I've been effusive in my love of this book. I've really been enjoying it and really highly recommend reading it and purchasing it and joining Roger's course in a few weeks here at IJS. So, Roger, I'd love to get things started uh, I mean, Jenny just mentioned The Jew and the Lotus, 30, did you say 37th printing? Um, so, and you've written a dozen other books in the last 30 years. But in this book, you actually draw a straight line, right, from there to here. And so by way of introduction, I'd love for you to share that story. How did this book come to be and why now?
Hmm. Well, thank you, Josh, and thank you, Jenny and IGS and everyone for coming tonight. Appreciate it so much. Um, how did it come about? Um, well, um, I uh, I wanted to start the book with a question that I heard back in Dharamsala when I was basically just an observer, watching what was unfolding between the Dalai Lama and the rabbis and Jewish scholars who'd come to answer his question about spiritual survival in exile, which is really the content of the Jew and the Lotus by and large. But he also asked a second question that's been somewhat overlooked, and it was brought in a very personal way by Michael Saltman, who's a student of the Dalai Lama's and um, currently lives in Brazil. Um, and Michael was a student of Tibetan visualization practice, which is a subset of Vajrayana, which is a very specific Tibetan path. So the question was this, in Tibetan Buddhism, we have this visualization practices, for instance. What do you guys have for overcoming afflictive states of mind? And I remember when I heard that question, I had no idea. I thought, I don't know, gefilte fish. I mean, what did we have really at that point? In my ignorance, what did I know about that? Of course, I didn't know what Vajrayana was either, but I knew the question was a penetrating one. And I understood afflictive states of mind, which translates a Sanskrit term klesha, which could mean defilement, impurity, but for my purposes in this book, it means reactivity. And reactivity means uh, anxiety, extreme anxiety, reactive rage and anger, blaming other people, shaming yourself, feeling guilty, resentment. I mean, these are all reactive states of mind. And um, the Dalai Lama clearly understood these as an affliction. And he understood, and this is the bottom line that I think is the bottom line, the tachlis, if you like, of this book is that if your practice, whatever it is, whatever your belief is, doesn't really matter, whatever your practice is, or your philosophy is, or your atheism is, or whatever it is, what does it do to help purify afflictive states of mind? That's really the premise of this book. And that question helped me to unify the last, I mean, like I say, the book took about 2 years to write plus 35.
Hmm.
So the 35 is like this whole history of different things I've learned and struggled with, especially working with dreams, um, and coming up finally with some answers, I think, for how we might purify or overcome these terrible afflictions, which clearly in our world today, I mean, our politics is divisive, and we have this term calling out. We call people out instead of engaging with them as human beings. We label them. We make up stories about other people, that they're bad people. You know, I was at a book signing and someone gave me a Sharpie to sign the book, and people were reacting to the Sharpie. I mean, that's how crazy it's gotten because, so and so uses a Sharpie. that we are really caught up in reactivity 24/7 without
Mm.
realizing it. Then there's social media. You know, what's our social media? A few months ago, because I live in New Orleans, I was interested in Pope Leo, who has family in the Creole part of New Orleans. And I kept seeing these beautiful pictures with fake quotes from Pope Leo that suited the people posting them. And I would write, well, it's not really true. He didn't say that. Well, guess what happened? I started seeing more of them and more of them. And then I was reacting to, so then I realized, oh my God, the, you know, I'm being forced into a reactive state of mind by social media. So this is why I think this question the Dalai Lama asked is still relevant. And that's what I aim to work with in this book and try to find answers for.
So, one of the many things that I really loved about this book is that you scaffold the practices. You sort of build them up. You start out with a simple a blessing practice, counting your blessings,
Hmm.
um, and then you layer onto that, adding dream work to it,
Hmm.
and then add a gratitude practice at the
Right.
end. So by the end, you have a threefold thing that happens. So I wonder, I'd love to invite you to share a little more about like how do these three build on each other, work together.
Okay, so I learned the blessing practice years ago. I'd studied with a teacher. I wrote about this in the History of Last Night's Dream, named Colette Abouker Muscat, who did visualization. So, and I met her, she was in her late 80s, living in Jerusalem. And she'd learned this from the Kabbalah of Light from Girona, she said. Another of her students was my friend Eve Ilson, the Rebbitzin, been married, the widow now of Reb Zalman, my heart teacher. And one time she was teaching at Eilat Chaim, the old Jewish Renewal Retreat Center, and she was up on a hill, as I remember, it was a Shabbat afternoon, and she just said, close your eyes, and we closed our eyes, and she said, count your blessings. That was the instruction. But from my own experiences with visualization, practicing this practice of really seeing, sensing, um, using all the senses as actively as possible in memory, I experienced a moment of blessing that I came to mind, and I was just with it, and then another one, and then another one. And soon, like a half hour had passed, and I was just I was in joy. It was beautiful. So I learned that practice from her. Um, There was a practical piece to this too. In our dream work, natural dream work, we don't interpret dreams, we bring them to life. And what I mean by that is we teach people how to be with the images in their dreams without judgment, reactivity, or numbness or story. Just be with the image. When you see an image, feel into it. How does it make you feel? So we give what we call homeworks, where we take an image from a dream and replay it in the same way. So I thought it'd be nice to do the blessing practice in the morning. Remember 3 moments of blessing from the previous day, really see them. And in that kind of, I don't know, open-hearted, genial mood, to then see the dream image, which sometimes is more disturbing and difficult and contains feelings, we don't want to feel. But in the kind of glow of the practice, it's easier to be more open to the image in the dream. The third part, I love your metaphor of scaffolding or layering, but the third part came about over time that, gee, the morning prayer and the Jewish morning prayer, Moda Ani, actually originated from a Kabbalist who was thinking about how when we dream, the soul leaves the body and journeys up to these higher realms and receives really good stuff, insights. And then on our way down, these demons kind of whisper in your ear and mess that up. And that's why our dreams are a little sloppy. But it's really a prayer of thanks for restoring my soul to me. Your mercy, your tenderness is so great. Thank you. And it felt like in experiencing these images from the previous day and from my dreams, I felt gratitude. And I wanted to say thank you. And Modani or Modani means thanks.
Mhm.
Um, I found a quote once from Meister Eckhart, the German mystic, and he says, if the only prayer you ever say is thanks, that would be enough. And I feel that so deeply that a great practice for me is just always, always to remember to thank you and thank you and thank you and thank each one of you.
Mm. Yeah, I was one of the best parts of the book was just being the way that you're able to deliver, a practice or a set of practices for us to do. And so I'm certainly a big believer. This is in my own book, but any book that leaves me only saying, wow, that was interesting.
Right.
It's like leaving me a little lacking, like I want something to do, and so
Mm,
it was really, I think, extremely helpful with that. I want to shift over to language for a second. I also want to remind everybody that if you want to ask a question, I do definitely want to have time for questions from the audience. If you want to ask a question, you go over to more on the bottom of your screen, and then you hit Q&A, and then that'll go to one of my colleagues who's getting the questions together, and we'll hopefully be able to ask a number of them. But you're a writer, and again, one of the wonderful things about this book is reading the work of a writer who's really, a mature and just as you know what you're doing. And there's a real comfort and ease and
yeah.
skill and craft that's very evident.
Hmm.
And you have a lot to say, I think, in this book about the possibilities and limitations of language. And much of the practice here is about letting go of some of the ways that language can trap us,
Hmm.
which is maybe an ironic thing to say for one who spends his day with words.
Hmm.
But there's a quote by there's a title of a book from J.L. Austin, right? Uh, Doing things with words. So,
Hmm.
what are you trying to help us understand about doing things or maybe not doing things with words in this book?
Thank you for that question. I'm not a writer so much as a rewriter, and I rewrite every page hundreds and hundreds of times. So it might look, I don't know how it looks, but there's a lot of trouble that goes into it.
Hmm.
And Probably because of my background as a poet, I think there's part of that as well. But the And in writing a book like this, a lot of it, I knew what I generally wanted to say, but I was discovering both how to say it and learning new things. I'm a learner in this book as well. Um, so yeah, in the book, I, I describe a scene. I live in a faubourg or a suburb of the French Quarter in New Orleans, just around the bend of the river, and it's called Bywater Marigny or Marigny Bywater, and it's a wonderful village type feeling, and a lot of artists and musicians live there. Um, and one day I was just taking a walk, and I just fell in love with a weed. It was a blue flower. But then as I looked at it, it wasn't blue wasn't really an adequate word. And as actually knelt before this flower while people were passing by and just absorbing every aspect of it. And the great thing is I did not know the name of this flower. It's a common weed, but I didn't know its name, which was wonderful because then I had to take in everything about it. It had little crepe paper blue mouse ears and it had a white lip and then yellow tangle of the pistils and stamens. And I was sort of into the intimate sex life of this flower for a while too. And it was kind of lounging around with it like people do in my neighborhood, sprawling around. And I just got absorbed. That's what the Buddhists call this absorption. And to be utterly absorbed in a thing in this world, an image, and to feel into it and how it made me feel. And there weren't any ready words. I was in that space. I think the Gaston Bachelard is this great French phenomenologist of dreams and images talks about the poet who exists on the threshold of being. I think on the threshold of being is just before a name, right? Children know this. I quote a poem by a young kid, a friend of mine, Andy Young's son, and he wrote this, how did people know to call it wind, to call it a thing, when it was just air moving? Yeah, that captures it too. This sense like, how can we experience something free of names? Because names also, they're very useful, but they also inhibit in some way our full encounter. Um, so I think it reminds me of the story we know of Adam was invited to name the creatures in hopes of finding a mate. And I just feel it this way that before each one, he had to really absorb the giraffeness of the giraffe or the whaleness of the whale. And then the right name maybe would come only after a long period of absorption.
Mm.
Um, so we're really talking also about the same with dreams, like we're in such a hurry to name and interpret images in dreams, and this is our reflex. And all we're doing with natural dream work is saying, could you just stay with the images a little bit longer before you interpret or explain them? You know, the word explain means to flatten out. That's what explain means, flatten out. Interpret means to come between, inter, and pret means a price. It means to set a price or value for the experience that's different from the experience itself. Like I come in and say what it means, and as soon as I do that, the dream's dead. Oh, now I know what the dream means. I don't have to worry about the image anymore. But what I want to do is be haunted by the images and feel them until I fully feel into them and sometimes can become them, can know what it's like to be a flower, a weed growing between a crack in the sidewalk. What is that like? And what does it feel like to be that? So
Yeah.
then I guess I said all what I want to say.
It's funny, someone asked the question, can we have thought without language, which is, that's a lot of what we're talking about right now. And
Right.
what's interesting is what's arising for me
Hmm.
is one of my very favorite stories in the Talmud. It's in Menachot 29. Some folks may know it. It's a story about Moses when it says when Moses would ascend on high and he found God, writing the letters of the Sefer Torah and putting the crowns, on
Right.
top of them. Right. And it's this whole story about that comes in the middle of a discussion of like how you draw different Hebrew letters, right?
Right.
But it's the story that's plopped in, and the punchline of that story that appears twice, and it ends in a heavy ending,
Right.
the Odyssey sort of ending. But the punchline of the story is God saying to Moses, "Shtok kacha la b'machshava lefanai," right? Be silent. This is how it's occurred before me, occurred in thought before me, or
Right.
arisen in thought before me,
Right.
and a lot of times, I think, for the first, I don't know how many years of my life, when I would read that story,
Hmm.
I think the first reading that I read it with was shut up and don't ask questions, right? And then years later,
Hmm.
it was, I think, James Jacobson Meisel's pointed out an interpretation of Rabbi Nachman about that story,
Right.
which I summarize as he rereads it as no, no, it's kach alei b'machshava lefanai. If you want to go up, if you want to arise to a level of greater thought, of pure thought,
Right.
it's beyond language, and you have to go through silence.
Right.
So, and I think something you're hitting on is
Hmm.
we are so good at words and we love words, and so much of the time though words really get in our way, and letting go sometimes of that and just being with, in order to arrive at something that maybe is a different kind of thought that is pre-verbal or maybe post-verbal.
Yeah, I mean, I just would like to leave the question open the person was asking. My question, what interests me is what happens if we hold back on interpretation of our experience of images, whether they're memories or dreams or perceptions, and feel into them longer. and then we deepen our connection and we have deeper capacity to feel. So I'm not against language, obviously, and the paradox you're pointing to, but I actually think so often when I do that, it actually helps me grow and challenges my language. I don't know if you ever had this experience where you see a thing in your dream, but you don't know the name for it. That's a remarkable thing. Like you'll see something, I don't know, the little uh, angled piece that holds up the roof. I don't know what that's called offhand, and I saw it in the dream, but I don't know the name for it. So we do have experiences of things where we don't really know the words, and some of them are quite common things, but um, also, and this, my emphasis on feeling is that our vocabulary for feeling, something Red Zalman said once at his talk, that our vocabulary for feeling is very impoverished, that
Mhm.
the lack of the poetic, and I don't mean by the poetic the professional poet. Everyone in this room is a poet in my sense. By poetry, I simply mean the utterance of the soul in response to deep feeling. So just to be clear, I'm not talking about did did I publish something? Who cares? I'm talking about this innate capacity that all of us have to create images, which we do spontaneously every night. The fact of the dream is such an amazing thing that I find great solace in that fact, regardless of what the dream is. The fact that every morning spontaneously I remember or have experiences or had experiences of spontaneous imagination, image making. What a wonderful thing. If I were inventing human beings, which fortunately I wasn't given the job, I don't know if I would have thought of that. So there's that piece. And then there's this other piece, this, you might say, this lust to name, this strong, I feel it very strongly, this desire to name and articulate. And there's a tremendous tension between the two, which I like. So I'm not pro naming or pro
Mhm.
words, and I'm not pro image. I'm just saying, look at what happens when we deeply engage images and how that stimulates our imagination, including our verbal imagination. One thing people say is, oh, Roger, you're talking about images, but we're Judaism. We don't do images. That's so untrue because our Torah, all our teachings are full of poetry. They're full of verbal images. And the cool thing about verbal images, I mean, I've been exposed to the incredible iconography of Hinduism and Tibetan Buddhism, even Catholicism and the churches, and it's sort of wonderful, amazing. Who would want not to have had Renaissance or Western art? But um, when you take an image like, Psalm 1, like a tree planted by the water, that to feel your faith is like being a tree planted by the water, and you can feel the image, something happens inside of you where you are forced to image it. You haven't read it until you've imaged it. If you just read it without the image, you really haven't read it. You can't
You,
read poetry or the Torah.
you talk about participating
Yes,
images, right? And
correct.
it's interesting, and even in that formulation is a little jarring every time you read it because it's not participating in or
Right,
participating with, it's participating the image,
right,
right?
right, right.
Yeah. Which is I think what you're describing here is like
That's right,
it's not even being with it because the with connotes that there's something separate. It's almost
right,
you're breathing it into being or being with it, that experience you had with the flower, with the weed in the lot.
right,
Um,
right. And
yeah.
well, Owen Barfield is the one in Saving the Appearances. He was one of the inklings, and at Oxford, and he talks about participating images so that, as he says, we bring our whole human being to the image. And also, by the way, in practicing this with a bolt of lightning or a flower or a dayflower or a bumblebee emerging from an hibiscus flower near Anya's park in Brooklyn, and you see the golden pollen on the abdomen, which I saw once. It's also feeling, it's a kind of identification so that I begin to understand what emergence is. What does it mean to emerge? What does it mean to come out of an experience? Do you see what I'm saying? So
Mhm.
it's something
Mhm.
out there, but it's also something I can feel in me, and it actually gives me an image language for my feelings that, our words are weak in some ways. Our words for feelings are very weak.
Mm.
Very, I forgot we were starting on that before, but it's okay. Our words for feelings, like uh, dreams can really help us with that. So someone will have a dream like, I was waiting for a bus because I had to take an exam and the bus was late and I was afraid I was going to fail the exam. Okay, so the person used the word afraid. Another person said, I was wandering out in the woods with some people, and far off we saw some lions. So we huddled together, and then a lion came up and was breathing on my face. I was afraid. Same word,
Mhm.
very different meaning. So
Mhm.
our dreams can help us have a better articulation of feeling and distinguish feeling, which is terror in this case, from reactivity, going back to the Dalai Lama idea, which is anxiety. Anxiety is because there's no exam in the dream. You're sitting on a plastic bus seat. Okay, there's it's all in your mind casting into the future. There's some story involved that produces anxiety, but lion breathing on your face, that's embodied, it's present,
Mm.
that's feeling, and it fills us. So we need all of our feelings, including the ones, and you mentioned this in previous discussion before this we started, but we need the ones that are hard. We need the feelings we don't want to feel. Terror,
Yeah.
no one wants to feel terror. No one wants to feel pain or sadness. We want to, so we start dampening down which feelings we're going to feel, and then we dampen down our joy as well. We dampen down our excitement. We dampen down our relationship to each other because we are displacing feeling into reactivity.
So let's pick up that piece for a second because
Sure.
this piece that the piece there's something you say about um on page 110 you have a note about pain and you say the feelings aren't all upbeat, right? What you were basically
No.
picking up right where you were saying, right?
Right.
And
Right.
I think this is an important point in mindfulness practice, right? Certainly, and
Right.
in our work here at IJS. And I think it feels particularly important for Jews, probably for a long time, certainly right now.
Right.
I remember it's been a little while since I read the Jew and the Lotus, but one of the things that I remember about it is that you contextualized the journey, the literal journey to visit the Dalai Lama, I think partially in terms of like this collective search for healing in the wake of Holocaust memory and trauma. Um, and I think certainly in my telling of how come so many Jews in the 60s, 70s, 80s, found Buddhism, a lot of them were searching for that. They might not even have been able to name it, but and they weren't finding it in their backyard, and that led to our founders wisely saying, well, we're missing something here. So many people are looking elsewhere.
Right.
But
Right.
it feels like today, we're living through a next chapter, let's say, of
Right.
pain and trauma and memory and struggle with agency and this search for healing.
Right.
And so I'd really invite you to expand here on how this spiritual healing work, which I think is really what it is,
Right.
might help us untangle some of the knots that we
Right.
seem to be caught in.
Yeah, so I want to say that the work I'm teaching in this book, um, it has as its goal, just as I believe every dream has, is a step along the way towards the goal of experiencing the sacred encounter, to actually have experiences of reverence and awe in our everyday lives, and to understand how important those experiences are, and how by having those experiences, um, we can transform from an egocentric lifestyle to a soul-centered lifestyle. So while we're talking a lot about feelings and reactions, I just want to say that the way I would understand it is something like this, that as long as we're in a state of reactivity, we cannot be in a state of imagination. Reactivity is the enemy of imaginative thinking. And we can't be in feeling, obviously, because reactivity is a diversion. Uh, Wordsworth calls it impaired imagination, quite rightly, right? So when we're in a state of impaired imagination or reactivity, um, we can't be present to feeling. And without feeling, we can't be in relationship. So in our current situation, um, including in addition to what already mentioned about social media and our divisive politics right now, deliberately provocative, provoking reactivity every day, every day. We can't wake up and listen to the news without reacting. Oh, look what he said today. Look what he said yesterday. And when we feel those things, we can't feel. We're in a reaction. That's the design. It takes our life away. So when it comes to the issues that are, as you say, we're kind of in this inflection point in Jewish history where the old ways of feeling about um, our identity as Jews and our relationship to Israel really is contested right now in very powerful and painful ways. I think it's important to understand the difference between feeling and reactivity, and especially the feeling of pain that we don't want to feel. We don't want to feel pain. So if I don't want to feel pain, it's easier for me to lash out in anger and reactivity and blame someone else. Oh, you're the one hurting me because you don't agree with my opinion about X, Y, or Z. But that does not produce relationship.
Mhm.
That produces separation and isolation, and we see that. Um, can we learn to own our pain? It's very vulnerable. If someone says something that hurts me, the person I'm close to, can I just say, that really, I feel a lot of pain.
Mhm.
And when we do that, if we're lucky, the other person responds, oh, sorry, or I feel pain too. And then you have relationship. But if you go to blame, you shouldn't say that. You use the wrong words. You're a inherently bad person because you hold XYZ belief, then there's no relationship possible. And I think that this reactivity is combined. Reactivity involves always making up a story about the other person, characterizing the other person, and not allowing the fact that the soul is situative. The soul is actually there in every person. Um, you know,
I want,
yeah, go ahead.
can I interrupt you here for 1 second?
Yes,
This is an important piece
by all
right
means.
here. Okay. Um, because I just finished teaching a course on how to listen to the news without how to read the news without losing your mind with Jane Eyre.
Good
And
luck.
some of these questions came up there also. And so I want to invite you to reflect here for a second. Somebody
Sure.
just shared a question of, isn't it necessary to react to wrongdoing? How do we make improvements in society without it?
Mhm.
Um,
That's a
uh,
question on the
that
board.
was the question. That's the question that was asked.
Okay.
So I'll invite you to respond to that. And and
Okay.
curious,
So
yeah.
again, if going back to the first principle, if we agree that reactivity is an afflictive state of mind, then we don't want to be in that state of mind, period. I mean, it's hard not to be. I get that. I'm not proposing that I've solved that. I'm just saying it's my struggle. But when I lived in Baton Rouge, I had a colleague who'd left Israel and he was very upset by the politics of Israel. And when he read the morning newspaper, his wife would cut out every article that mentioned Israel. So he had these holes in the newspaper. And that's an approach. Avoid, but I think could we find a way to um, feel the pain when we hear something and express the pain without reacting. Um, uh, do we need to be reactive to stand for the truth or for justice or to join others in community and joy? Do we also need to be reactive? It's a question, right? I doubt that, but I understand it's a lot easier to move people with reactivity, rile them up, make them mad. That gets get them hating on somebody. That's a whole lot easier than to go to the guy in the MAGA hat or the person who maybe doesn't agree with you about Israel and say, look, when you say this, I just feel a lot of pain, but I really want to know you better. I really want to understand where you're coming from. And can we have a conversation? I realize that's on the cellular level. It's not on the mass level, but I I think it's a more constructive approach than creating more reactivity. Um,
Yeah. And I wonder also if, the word responsive, responding rather than reacting, right? I think that's
yeah,
something that we teach a lot is, how you interrupt that. So much of it is about interrupting that process, which is a natural biological process of activating fight or flight mechanisms, et cetera.
yeah,
And so what we can do is interrupt that
right,
and then choose, all right, now from a state of non-reactivity,
right,
I can still act. I can still do lots of things, but I'm making a choice rather than simply being doing that from a reactive state.
right.
And it doesn't mean you're disengaging necessarily.
But I just want to say that these kinds of questions are important, but these kinds of hard questions are at the graduate level. And I'm
Right.
just starting at could we look at a flower? Could we
Yeah.
build up a fund of experiences of joy in our everyday life that might give us more resilience and kindness? Can we learn by seeing the beauty in the world around us to see the beauty in other people around us, even when it's not quite so obvious? Could we just sort of do all that work every day until we build up perhaps more capacity for resilience, and then there's less room and time in us to waste time on reacting to things, many of which are just stories that actually have no content.
Yeah.
We're often react. How many times have you reacted to something, then you found out later, oh, really wasn't nothing. It was just a provocation. So I'm not saying we can't be engaged with the world, but I want to be engaged with the world with my whole human being. I want to be engaged with my feelings and not
Yeah.
just with my reactions. So, um, there's a teaching the Baal Shem Tov gave. I was once, years ago, I was curious, what's the Jewish word for equanimity? And a guy taught me this Hebrew word, hishtavut, which I think more or less means making things equal. Is that right, Josh? Is that more or less?
But it's used for equanimity, sure. Yeah. Well, the equi
So,
part. Yeah.
yeah, the equi. So, the um, the guy said, well, the Baal Shem Tov had a teaching on that. And what was that? He said, well, if whatever happens to me, I can say, if it's good enough for God, who am I to judge? That's hishtavut.
Hmm.
Okay. So, okay, someone cuts in front of me in traffic. If I react, then I'm not at a high level of hishtavut. If I don't react, if I blast my horn and give them the finger or something, then I'm pretty low level. Someone's in line in front of me in the grocery store and it says nine or few items, and I'm counting the items. I'm probably at a pretty low level of hishtavut, right? So, um, but how about the hard ones? We lose someone
Mhm.
love. We see a terrible accident. We see terrible things happening in the world. Uh, it's hard not to
Yeah.
react. So what he adds to this is, if whatever happens, I can say, if it's good enough for God, who am I to judge? Whatever, then I'm at a very high, high level. So I don't beat myself up because I'm at this level. I recognize that, but it does give me an aspiration, like to try to maybe get a little higher on that ladder.
Yeah. I want to, in the time we have left,
Yeah,
one important thing to get to is your relationship with Reb Zalman.
right.
I think a couple of the most moving passages in the book where you are places where you talk about him,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
one was that you recounting how, in the encounter with the Dalai Lama, how he embodied an angel, right, during their meeting in 1990. And there's
right,
another where you narrate the experience of receiving a posthumous letter from him
right,
uh, after he passed away
right.
to you. and then experiencing his presence visiting you in dreams.
Right, right, right.
So I think for this audience in particular, and we actually had a question that asked, for this, but we had this one I had prepared. So all right. Um, I think it would be great to hear you share a bit more about your relationship with Reb Zalman and how his teaching really comes through this book.
Mm. Well, mm, Reb Zalman was a dear teacher of mine and of so many, and very personal relationship. He always did it personal, and you know, um, I think from the very time I first met him in JFK Airport, he was leaning against a stanchion and translating the Buddhist scripture, the Dhammapada, into Hebrew, like he was doing this dialogue in his mind, really. Um, but when he, I'll just tell one story. When he died, as you mentioned, I got a message that he'd left a message for me, and I was just so overwhelmed. And this is the kind of person he was. I mean, he said goodbye to a certain circle of close people, but he wrote 50 personal messages, which he left for 50 or more people, and I happen to be one of them. And he said, Roger Laban, I love you, and I want you to know I'm grateful for all the things you did for me, what worked out and what didn't work out. I knew he meant that, because we had done a book project and I had lost heart and kind of abandoned it. So that didn't work out. And he said, and I'll do my best to stay in touch. And I knew he meant, because I'd worked with his dreams, so I knew that he meant through dreams. And, one time I dreamed that early on I was having some problem with a writing project, and he came and he said, Roger, you have pages and pages in you. Which I love that. But sometimes he would challenge me. And one time we were in a shul together, and this guy was just like on the bima, and he was sort of howling and crying and screaming. And Reb Zalman turned to me and said, "What would it take to get you to pray like that?" I thought, "Oh, okay." So there's some rebukes there too. Um, um, Another time, he I don't know, he said something and I offered a little footnote and he just looked at me like, zip your lip. I got really quiet and he said, he pointed to a tree. It was a fig tree and it was swaying like this in the wind, like this, just swaying. And he said two words. He said, follow this. It was such a affirmation really of this path of paying attention to these moments in every day where you see emotion and you get caught up in the motion and it's a feeling also. Follow this. So that was a wonderful gift in a dream that kind of affirmed also this practice of counting blessings.
Mm. We're coming up on the end here, and
Right.
I want to give people a taste of the actual writing. You've told a number of stories and vignettes that appear in the book, which is great.
Sure.
But the writing is really Geschmack, as we might say. It's very tasty.
Thank
Um,
you. I have
so
to say, by the way, excuse me, but I really appreciate the way you've openly loved this book. I thank you so much. It's unbelievable.
Well, you struck some kind of chord for me. So, and you're a poet. I write, and but you spend much more of your time writing than I do, and it's just anyway, it's a pleasure for me. Um, so if it's good for you, good with you,
Yeah.
I'd love to invite you to read the basically the ending of the book. This is from
Sure.
like page
Right.
186
Right.
to the end. It's the last, sort of
Okay.
two
So let
half
me just
pages.
let me just
Yeah.
say one thing because I mentioned in the end my grandson Boaz, who I talk about if you want to develop a capacity for radical amazement, as Rabbi Heschel talks about it, hang out with a toddler. So like I'd be watching, put some toast in the toaster and he's watching and watching. Boaz is his name. We're watching. And then I start watching with him and then all of a sudden, boom. And it's such joy, like, oh wow. you slow down and you start to feel things the way a child does. And that's a really great, he's my teacher, right? So, okay, I'll read this. By seeing into the life of things one by one, the life of each thing, and of each one I encounter, I feel the source of life and the source of blessing in them all. Having attended to the life in images, I also look for the images in words. The word makor in Hebrew refers to a fountain or spring. I dream up an artesian well with water bubbling out of the earth. I remember a stream in En-Gedi where David chased King Saul around. I remember too how Wordsworth revived his imagination by dwelling on powerful memory images he called spots of time. He wrote, I repaired to them as to a fountain. This practice anchors my day and gives me strength to face whatever bad news comes, and it does come. There's darkness in our world, pain and disappointment in my personal life, but remembering gratitude sets me right. I hope always to repair to the source of blessings that I feel in the things and the people in my dreams, the things and people in my memory, and the things and people in my world. I hope always to find in my dreams and in my waking life, in my memory and in my heart, the possibility of wonder, joy, and awe. I hope also to pass that sense of blessing on by blessing those I meet, by seeing what is good in them and amplifying it in words. Walking down Burgundy Street, hearing the sparrows and crows, seeing the crepe myrtles flower and the faces of my friends and neighbors, hanging out with my grandson Boaz and all my beloveds, I hope always to see into the life of things.
Can't top that. I'm going to give it back to Jenny. Roger, thank you so much.